You're listening to Proven Perspectives, a podcast with John Hawkins, the founder of Leadership Edge. I'm Laura, John's daughter, and in each episode, we'll explore a topic related to life, leadership, or mentoring. Through over 50 years of faith in Christ, John has learned proven life and leadership perspectives that will equip listeners for a lifestyle of leadership in their marriages, families, careers, communities, and churches. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Laura, it is great to hear your voice today.
It's great to hear your voice, too. How's your day going so far?
It has been back-to-back Zoom meetings. I have been going since 9 this morning, and it's 2 here, so it's just been a lot of Zoom meetings. But they've all been good, and I've been blessed to get to be a part of them. But it's mainly sitting in the old office.
The old office, international headquarters.
Going from one to the other.
Uh-huh.
But that's been good.
Good. Yeah, when I first got on, you were just eating your lunch. So that is a busy morning. But what I want to know is, so you guys have your kitchen you don't have, the oven's not quite right, but your kitchen is almost back to normal, right? Like what I want to know is when can we come over and have some of your good cooking? I've been missing your cooking, Dad. And Mom's a good cook too, for sure.
The kitchen is done. You know, They had to put back in the old oven because when the company brought the new oven, it was already damaged. And so they took it off and they'll put it in the new oven next Friday. But it is completely done, and we're slowly unpacking the dishes and everything that goes in the kitchen and getting it set up. But I'm hoping that by next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, I'll be up cooking again, and would love to have you guys over. I've already been planning some meals I want to do as soon as we can get back. But as you know, we're heading out for travel tomorrow, so we won't be back till Wednesday. So it'll probably be next weekend before we get going again.
Yeah. Oh, I know that'll be so nice. It's just so nice when even if it's just like really cleaning an area, but I'm sure even more so with renovating it, like walking in and seeing. Yeah. That's a great feeling. Well, good. Well, I am looking forward to our podcast today, Managing for the Glory of God. And it's interesting because when I first read this topic, I was thinking, okay, so like kind of a businessy one. But as I was looking over the questions, I saw, from what you were saying, this has to do with like my family's laundry and you and Mom serving on the coffee and donuts team. So it seems like it really applies to business, but also kind of all of life. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So how does this make sense? Okay. This whole managing for the glory of God. And what does it have to do with your family's laundry or Janet and me serving on the donut and coffee team at our church? I think that in any organization, whether it's a family or a church or a business or community, any organization, there's 2 things that are always needed. One is leadership, and one is managing. And I actually learned a lot of this from a secular author named John Kotter, Kotter, where he wrote several different pieces, both in books and then in the Harvard Business Review, where he was distinguishing between managing and leading. And so leadership has to do with kind of bringing people around a vision and working together as a team to execute or accomplish that vision. So I was thinking for your family, like a leadership moment for your family was when you had your first foster baby. And as you were preparing your other kids for that took some leadership of helping them to kind of see a vision of a new child and all that. I think that laundry is more of a managing thing, where it's more a just endlessly needed process that just needs to be managed well. And it happens over and over again. And it's an opportunity, though, I think, and we'll be looking at this more fully, to actually honor and glorify God. And similarly, at our church, the church you guys are members of and we're members of, there's all kinds of leadership moments where our pastors lead us, around a vision and accomplishing that vision in terms of what God's called our church to be. But there's also things like every Sunday there's coffee and donuts. And we need a smooth running process of, okay, how are we going to do the coffee and donuts this week? So that's the tie, I think, is your laundry, our church's coffee and donuts are processes that need to be managed. And because we're Christians, we can actually do that for the glory and honor of God.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Well, and a couple of things as you were talking, I was thinking, one, did you mention that you have show notes that some of what you're talking about pulls from? Because if not, listeners, look at the show notes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then also, that idea that I think it does really change, or has the opportunity to really change my perspective and heart in serving and doing kind of some of those mundane things, if I'm seeing it as what you said, like an opportunity to glorify God. Or I was reading something recently that talked about, doing housework as an act of worship to God, like kind of both of those. It does just completely reframe what's happening, So anyways, that's really an encouraging thing for me. Thanks for sharing that. So I guess, can you tell us about some examples in the Bible of people we see managing for the glory of God?
Yeah, there's one that's really interesting in Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. And I'll be reading this from the ESV. And it says here, now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists, or kind of the non-Jewish members, arose against the Hebrews, or the Jewish members, because their widows, the Hellenist widows, were being neglected in the daily distribution. This daily distribution, it's a little unclear in the text exactly what it is. When it's called daily distribution, it sounds like just a food kitchen or place where food's distributed.
Yeah.
But then later it says it's more like a meal. But anyhow, the Hellenist widows were being neglected. And it says, and the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples and said, it is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Mm-hmm. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint for this duty. So they had a process to be managed, and it's the feeding or giving the food out to all of the widows, and especially not neglecting the Hellenist or the non-Jewish widows. And so the apostles decided, we need to be doing some other things. We need someone else to manage this process. Mm-hmm. And so they selected some people to do that. And it's really interesting that the requirements that they were looking for was not that they had ever distributed food to widows. The requirements that are mentioned is they're of good repute, like they have good reputation. They're full of the Spirit and of wisdom, and that they're the ones. So it's interesting to think about, in this example of a process needing to be managed, the distribution of food, that it was given to these men, and that the thing that was most important was their character and the certainty of their walks with God, that they were filled with the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And you get the idea that they needed to learn some skills around this. Like they needed to learn best ways to distribute large amounts of food to a large number of people. Mm-hmm. That there were skills to develop, but the most important thing was the character and the godliness. And so I think what I take from that situation is that when we're thinking about managing, whether it's the laundry or managing the donuts and coffee at our church or wherever, that one of the most important things for us to consider is our own character and our own, in a sense, godliness. Because God will want to use this to develop our character, to stretch our character, and to stretch our godliness. And along the way, we need to learn, if there's better ways to do laundry than other ways, then I want to do the better ways. And if there's better ways to hand out coffee and donuts on Sundays, and we're constantly looking for better ways to do that, then we want to do it. But it all begins with our character, with our own walk with God, our own godliness. Does that make sense as a biblical example and kind of the lessons I'm drawing from it?
Totally. Yeah, no, it really does. Well, and one thing that I'd like to hear a little bit more about is when you said, like, our character is, I don't know if you said the most important part, but that that God wants to use our managing or serving opportunities to grow our character and our godliness. Can you explain a little bit more about how he does that?
Well, there's a verse, I think, in First Thessalonians that says, and this is the will of God for you, your sanctification. And so that tells us that in anything God leads us into, one aspect of what will be going on is us being stretched to be more like his son, to be more fully sanctified. And so I think with this illustration about the men who needed to distribute the food to the Jewish and non-Jewish widows, they needed character in a sense to qualify to do it, but also their character was going to be stretched in the doing of it. And so in Leadership Edge, we talk about that there's three aspects of leadership. There's character, there's competence, and commitment. And I think that we're emphasizing right now the character that's always at play. But in managing whatever we're managing, we want to grow in our competence. And we want to always fulfill the commitments that we're making to it. Does that make sense, Laura?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, it made me think about, I don't know if this has been your experience, but with the Upward program at our church, I feel like every year, probably multiple, 3 or 4 people that I talk to at the games will just talk about just what a well-run program it is at Seabreeze. Absolutely. And that's just I just constantly, it's probably even more than 3 or 4 times, but just consistently, that's something that people really notice. And I think that flows out of, kind of with what you're saying, it kind of flows out of, I think one of the big strengths of our church is leaders like pastors and their wives, and the trickle down from that of a real emphasis on one of the biggest metrics of where we're at with God is how much we're seeking to faithfully perform what he's called us to do today. So anyways, but it's interesting what you're saying. So both God will help us to grow in that's an important characteristic to have in order to be able to be used by God. I think that's what has led to the flourishing of our Upward program. There's just so many kids that want to be a part of it, but then also God continuing to develop that even more in those service opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, those who are involved in managing those processes, their character needs to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And their competence, their ability. I remember the first week or two, a time or two that I served on the coffee and donut team in our church. I was pretty freaked out about, oh my gosh, will I make this coffee right? And how do you do this? And I remember one time I was just mortified that I had made decaf coffee and put it into the caffeinated urn. And then I was like, oh my gosh, how am I? I think that your character kind of gets you in the door, but you do need to learn how to do the job well. You do need to learn how to be competent in it. And again, with that Upward program, I've only been a part of it twice. And for our listeners, that's a basketball program that our church sponsors, has hundreds of local kids in it every year. It seems like both years there is continued growth and improvement in how it's done.
Yeah.
And certainly the character of our volunteers and our pastors and leaders come through. You see that, but you also see that we're just getting better and better at knowing how to do it. And that's really good.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because that is, you're saying that's even, it's competence as much as God's continuing to develop that. That's a good point. Well, so Dad, I think one of the challenges with some of these processes, like laundry, for example, is that it can just seem really mundane and unimportant. So do you have any thoughts on what helps you, or what could help me or the listeners to keep a clear perspective with menial tasks?
Yeah, I think that it's so easy to think, well, everyone else is out doing really important stuff. And I'm sitting here, washing my family's socks, or
that's good.
Say on Sundays, when I am on donut duty, I could be sitting there thinking, well, the pastors are doing everything important and I'm just, handing out donuts. But I think that what you have to do, someone told me one time, a long time ago, that if you're thinking of things in terms of secular and spiritual, that which determines whether it's spiritual or not is who told you to do it. And that if God called you to do it, whether it's washing socks or handing out donuts or whatever it is, then there is a real importance in it. There is a real purpose in it. And it really is something that matters to God. Mm-hmm. And it really is a context in which we can honor him and do it with all of our hearts. Now, I was thinking back about, the reformers like Martin Luther and others. During the Reformation, one of the things that they were really emphasizing was all that God does in just menial secular work. And I think before the Reformation, there had been such almost like an ascendancy of pastoral people to where those who were not pastors almost felt like second-class citizens, and that what they did was not really very important or really very significant. And so I've always been just cheered on by when you begin to think about all of life from a God-centered perspective, you can see what Martin Luther was meaning when he wrote in The Estate of Marriage. That's a book or tract that he wrote. He said that God and the angels smile when a man changes a diaper. And probably one of the reasons why God and the angels smile when a man changes his diaper is because most men aren't very good at it and they are fumbling around. Backwards. But I think the other part of what Luther was meaning was that it gives them joy to see a man especially humble himself and provide good care to a baby, that matters. And then William Tyndale, he took it even further where he wrote, if our desire is to please God, then pouring water, washing clothes, cobbling shoes, and preaching the word is all one. Now, that's a remarkable statement. Mm-hmm. It's basically saying every context that we find ourselves in, whether it's preaching the word or, fixing shoes, is an opportunity by which we can please God. Mm-hmm. We can honor him. I think for Martin Luther and the others, the importance was not the nature of the task, but that it was done in faith. In other words, were diapers changed out of faith in and obedience to God. Do it in faith, it elevates it to where it's not just menial. It's real. And I think, so how would one change a diaper by faith? What does that even mean? How do you get to that? I think what it means is that whatever we're doing, whether it's diapers or sermons or laundry for the family or whatever, we're seeing this as an opportunity to please God and to serve others. Yeah. And we're asking him for the grace we need to do it. That's good. Where we look to him to humble us, to make us willing, to make us able, and to actually do it. We've talked in another podcast about Hebrews 11:6. Yeah. Where it says, and without faith it's impossible to please God, for he who comes to him must believe that he is and that he rewards those who seek him. And I think that that's applicable to the menial, mundane work that we have every day. It is in some ways menial or mundane, but in other ways, it's an amazing opportunity that God gives us to trust him, to look to him for the strength that we need, and then to act accordingly. And to do it with all of our hearts. No,
that's really good. So some of what I pulled from what you were saying was if we're trying to figure out how to be content and serve with joy and the menial things that we have to do today. So one thing you were saying is looking to God and kind of figuring out where, kind of getting a sense that he is here, that this honors him. I think I loved what you said about asking him for the grace to do it and asking him for humility. Those are both really good. Because I think some of it can be this sense of either feeling too good for a task that we have, or that can be something I can struggle with, or this isn't how this day is supposed to go, or something like that. But if I'm saying, God, you know how this day is supposed to go, and I, kind of asking him to give us the humility. And then also when you were talking about earlier, just that I don't know, like both that passage from Acts 6 about finding these guys who could oversee this part of the ministry, freed up other people to do what God was calling them to do. And when you were talking about like on Sunday mornings, you doing coffee frees other people up, just like that idea of like kind of joyfully playing our part, and
absolutely.
And that they're really when I am doing that, there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of like fulfillment, but it is, so often that's not where, so anyways, so those are really good reminders for me, even just to pray and say, God, give me the grace for this. Give me humility right now. So Dad, as we wrap up, can you give us an example of what this looks like in real life? I feel like you've already given some, but I'd love one more.
Well, I'll just mention a friend of both of ours at our church, a lady named Joanne. And Joanne's just one of the most likable people you'll ever come across. And she is the manager of the coffee and donuts service at our church every Sunday. And the amazing thing about how Joanne manages it is it's with such a kind of right touch to it. And what's really interesting is I doubt many people in our church actually even know that Joanne's the manager of this thing. But all the dozens of donuts that we give out every Sunday, all the gallons of coffee that we give out every Sunday, and how smoothly week after week after week after week that goes, you're like, well, who's responsible for this? And on the human side of it, well, Joanne is.
Yeah.
And again, she does it with such a great touch, always, never drawing attention to herself.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed about how she manages is a lot of times if one of us are going to be out because we're traveling or on a trip or something, she's the one who will fill in. So she's not above doing coffee and donuts herself.
Yeah.
But I've learned a lot from Joanne, just in terms of it's just the right touch. She gives just enough direction, just enough support, and then it just runs. But she's always in the background if needed. So I think she's a great example to me, Joanne is, of what a good manager, especially in a volunteer church kind of context, looks like. And I think that, for all of us, God wants us to be like Joanne.
Yeah.
And the different places that we serve, the different processes that we manage, to be walking with the Lord and to manage the things in front of us with that kind of heart, with that kind of attitude.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think kind of my takeaway are a couple of phrases that you've talked about, kind of joyfully playing our part. I'm not sure if you use those exact words, but just kind of, like this is the part in my family, this is the part on Sunday morning or whatever the context is. And then doing it with joy. And then also when you were talking about humility, like it seems like such an essential component of really doing it to the glory of God, So those, this was really helpful for me, Dad. Any final thoughts from you?
Well, no, it's great to discuss these kind of things with you, Laura. And listeners, we're so glad that you listen in to these podcast episodes. If we at Leadership Edge can ever be of help to any of you, please let us know. You can go to our website, lead-edge.com, and find all kinds of resources, and also find training programs that you can sign up for and learn better skills in leading and managing and mentoring and those kind of things. So please go to the website as you'd like and let us know if there's any way we can be of help. And Laura, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Dad. And thanks, listeners, for joining us.
Listeners, if you would like more perspectives on life, leadership, and mentoring, please go to the Leadership Edge website at lead-edge.com. Or if you have questions or ideas about future podcasts, please reach out to us at lei@lead-edge.com. We look forward to hearing from you.